Martin Scorsese's mammoth 3.5 hour gangster picture, The Irishman, sees him reunite with his old stars Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci and Harvey Keitel, and also sees him work with screen legend Al Pacino for the first time. The story sees the cast go back and forward in time due to the narrative's heavy use of flashbacks. To combat the fact that his main cast are all senior citizens and need to play people as young as in their 20s, Scorsese utilized state-of-the-art special effects courtesy of Industrial Light and Magic to make his cast age appropriate. For their November issue, Sights and Sound magazine sat down with the veteran director for a 3.5 hour interview where they discussed the film. Sights and Sound have released a short excerpt of the interview in which Scorsese discusses how he, his editor Thelma Schoonmaker, and the visual effects team headed by ILM's Pablo Hellman worked on preserving the actors' performances and emotions through the de-aging. The interviewer asks, about the use of youthification in the film, you were quoted as saying at an earlier stage, when I think you weren't happy with the first version, does it change the eyes at all? And Martin Scorsese replies, that's the second time I've heard that as if it was a negative thing. Actually, it's not. What I was saying was, that's the job, that's what we have to do. In other words, you keep the eyes, but even if you keep the eyes, there's so much more to that. There's the crow's feet, there's the bags under the eyes, there's the eyebrows, there's the way the light hits. So every frame you see, there's infinitesimal work that's been done. Ultimately, it's about the performance and about the character. I knew the sort of picture it had to be. I said, I can't have these actors, with mechanical objects on their heads, because they're not going to do it. It gets in the way. But then Pablo came back to me and said, I think I've figured a way. And he made I guess they're called contacts, little pieces of fabric or something that were really invisible. And you could be wearing it around here, he indicates to his face. And at a certain point you're talking to a person, you're not talking to a machine. The challenge, as they say these days, was to take those elements and keep the person, not lose them in something that is cleaned up. It's really about keeping that character, keeping those emotions and their faces alive. In one scene where De Niro's younger, for example, and he's talking to some people and he has to convey a kind of vulnerability and a helplessness, making him younger, a couple of times we noticed, made him look like he was threatening them. Now why is that? The line around the mouth. So let's go into the mouth. Work on that. A week later they bring it back. No, it still looks like he's threatening. Well, maybe the eyes have to be fixed, around the eyes. I'm going for what the performance is. Ultimately, we felt that we regained through the youthification process the vulnerability in that moment. The interviewer then asks, so it makes you look very closely at the actual way that facial expressions work? Yes, at every aspect of the face. And then of course, as the actors move in the frame, the light changes. So a few frames this way, you've got to put some texture here. And so you're really recreating the performance in a way, with the basic truthful elements of the actor and protecting those. We stumbled through that. We said, what about trying this? What about that? It would come back a week later, we would say, it looks a bit funny here or there. So we'd go back. We did that with every shot, with Joe Pesci and Al too. It's a learning experience. In a way, I look at it as, well, there's the convention in cinema of the use of makeup. If you look at an older film, there was an acceptance by the audience where the hair is powdered, or you know that that's makeup and that moustache is fake, but you went with the illusion. I remember the great Dick Smith and the old age makeup he made for Dustin Hoffman's 121-year-old character in Little Big Man, or the makeup in The Elephant Man. Where's the heart? Where's the performance? It's there, because John Hurt was great. But I know that's makeup, so as a viewer I go with the illusion. I give you something back so I can get something from the world that you're trying to depict for me and the characters. It's another level of that, I think. And ultimately, it might be superior in the long run to creating an illusion, rather than having to apply prosthetics and that sort of thing. Mind you, we did a great deal of makeup on the film too. The interviewer then asks, do you think this system will have an effect on other films that are made? I think so. Obviously, it may have an effect on films that are trying to create more of a futuristic world, but it's as good as the people doing it really. Pablo and his group and ILM were amazing, and we were, myself and Thelma, on them to work in the slightest, the most scrupulous way. One of the key things was I didn't want to make a film dealing with this subject matter and this character, and where we were taking him to the very end, and have half the film working with younger actors that were supposed to be Bob, supposed to be Joe, and supposed to be Al. I just didn't. And so you may find that now that's something that is doable, actors playing themselves younger or older. This is a first time and there is an element of cost, but I think the more it's used, the more the cost will become reasonable. I think this is a really interesting interview. Scorsese touches on a few areas, but the depth he covers the de-aging CGI with is excellent. It seems what he was concerned with more than almost anything was retaining the performance of the characters, as opposed to chopping and changing the actors' acting. Though he does admit an element of it did involve the team creating and recreating the performance. It's actually something I talked about a lot in my video, The Irishman, Will the De-Aging CGI Affect the Performances?, where I discussed the CGI in detail, talking about how they could edit expressions, wrinkles, the colour of the actors' faces and so much more with the CGI. And what I discussed was how far can you go before you are essentially making an animated movie, or at the very least, completely changing an actor's performance. An example would be if Pacino's face went red because of anger, or let's say he made a certain expression. Would you credit that to the actor or the animator? And this is pretty much what Scorsese is talking about in the interview, retaining the original performance of the actor to keep the person, as he puts it, and not to lose it in post-production cleanups. He talks extensively about how they went about making sure this was the case, but he also says some of the actors' expressions that are in the film is coming from the CGI. His comments about De Niro's vulnerability were quite telling. It seems as though they could not get De Niro to look vulnerable when the 70-plus-year-old was filming his scene, or at the very least the vulnerability was there but was lost through the de-aging, and they essentially had to create it by fixing up the eyes and the eyebrows and lines, etc. It's new territory to say the least. It's cool though that he's taken it so seriously and recognized that the CGI is integral to the success of the film and the performances, and he mentions that he and Schoonmaker were constantly pressurizing ILM to get the details right. It's also cool hearing him give a little shout out to the makeup work on the film, because from set images I have to say the makeup in the film is incredible. They've managed to de-age De Niro here to about 60 years old using no makeup, and even in the scenes where makeup and CGI will be combined to perform the de-aging, the cast doesn't look half bad. Many who have seen the film say that the cost and the effort was largely worth it. I have seen the movie and you can get my thoughts on the CGI in my review of the film on my channel. He also talks about how as an audience we accept certain elements of a film we know to be false. He gives examples of actors being made to look different ages through makeup, and how despite the fact that we know Dustin Hoffman is not really 100 years old, we accept it. We go along with the illusion. And personally, I think some might find it difficult with The Irishman at first, because it's new for all of us, but many will get used to it as the film goes on, and in terms of the movie industry as a whole, if this de-aging process picks up, and providing it's executed properly, we may find that audiences start to buy the de-aging in the same way we buy De Niro being an old man via makeup in Once Upon a Time in America, for example. But as Scorsese suggests, it may be that visual effects completely take over from prosthetics. That isn't a crazy statement to make these days, when you look at characters like Thanos, created using motion capture and CGI, characters like Azog in The Hobbit being completely CGI, and visual effects artists removing boom mix and equipment from the frame in such subtle ways that we never even realize it. I remember seeing an article or something years back where Keira Knightley talked about how in the old days, like for example the first Pirates of the Caribbean film she made, they would use makeup to remove spots and pimples, but in movies later on she was surprised to learn that they stopped bothering and instead removed these things in post-production. It must be easier on the actors, which brings me to the other main point mentioned by Scorsese, in that he was aware of other techniques available to make the actors younger, but chose to go with this method because the actors' performances wouldn't be obstructed. There wouldn't be any mechanical equipment on their head, for example, like Will Smith in Ang Lee's Gemini Man. Scorsese didn't want to do it, really because of who the actors were, how good they are, knowing that the film would just not work if Joe Pesci had to carry around a xenomorph skull on his head. And one final point he mentions is that of casting younger actors who would mimic the veteran cast, which, clearly from the interview, is not an option Scorsese wanted to go with. The Irishman will be released on Netflix on November the 27th. Thanks for watching.